change religions, I have a free book written by Jesus!
No, Elder Cunningham, that's not how we do it. You're making things up again.
Hello everybody, welcome back to something or other. Is it another one of these? Possibly. I'm going to touch on a subject I don't really speak about this a lot. I'm going to go on about some tenet of religion. I've probably only done one video about it before, specifically about it, and that was about the ridiculousness of Noah and his flood. This one is going to be about, I wonder if you can guess. Let's get inside. Right, the Book of Mormon. This obviously is a t-shirt from the musical, which is at the Prince of Wales Theatre in London. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already, which again was based largely off the episode of the South Park all about the Mormons, where a Mormon family move into South Park and don't put themselves at odds. It's about huge misconceptions. It's tricky because you don't want to have a go at the people who follow the church, because like any devout religious followers who have good in their heart, you can't really have a go at them for that. But it's when they follow that belief system and that religion so strongly that they feel compelled themselves, or it's in their doctrine or their teachings, to bring others to the flock or bring others to the church. Now, they wouldn't be so bad if the church itself wasn't so bloody stupid. Now, religion as a whole, I think I signed off on my my previous video with treat religion like you old fella. Keep it to yourself, enjoy it in your own time, and don't wave it about in front of your kids. There was a worse version of that, but I'm not going to go into that right now. This is a family show after all. So, thing about the Book of Mormon is, and as I said before, it's bloody ridiculous, and it beggars belief, and it confuses me greatly, and it upsets me a little that normally rational people could be suckered in and taken in by what is so obviously manufactured garbage. Now, to expand on this slightly, you have to understand how the Book of Mormon came around. Now, it's supposedly a chapter 3. There's a few lines in the musical. What is it? It's something about the Book of Mormon is if the Bible is Star Wars, then the Book of Mormon is Return of the Jedi. I'm interested. It is, for lack of a better expression, a fanfic. Now, if you look up the definition of fanfic, in the simplest of terms, a piece of fiction based on another piece of media such as books, TV shows or video games. Obviously, this is 1832. No such things as TV shows or video games, but it was very much. The Bible was the leading force for an amazingly large amount of people. And this Joseph Smith came along and said, this Bible book you guys keep on bashing around, do you know what's missing? Do you know what it could do with more of America? It could do with a bit more America in this religious book that was centered around the Black Sea or the Dead Sea and encapsulates an area only 500 miles wide. I'm going to write my own version, and I'm going to make up a load of garbage about how Jesus went to America, lived there for 3 days while he was supposed to be in a hole somewhere in Jerusalem.
I have in my possession an ancient book written on gold plates that tells of Jesus Christ's second coming here in America.
In America? Really? That sounds kind of...
Dum 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 dum.
A little bit of history about Joseph Smith. He was not a nice man. So when he got to about 33, he suddenly decided he was going to marry anything with boobs that smiled at him, including, and not limited to, a 14-year-old girl who, we can only presume he also laid with her. In these days, is statutory rape. So attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement. There was the Navarro Press. It was the Naval Press, where basically one publication very highly critical of him, his teachings, his followers and his church. So he demanded that the press be destroyed. So is there anyone else in recent memory you can think of who, instead of defending himself or trying to be a better person, just attacked and destroyed the media outlet that criticised him in the first place? But anyway, so Joseph Smith, let's carry on. Joseph Smith, after all this, he was also convicted he had a seer stone, which is literally a pebble. And he claimed that this gave him foresight and insight, and was able to psychically connect with people and tell them their fortunes, etc. Basically conning them out of all their money. The seer stone is not a new concept. In fact, the items, the Urim and Thurim, I've put Urim and Thummim, they're mentioned in the Bible. They are stones that are embedded in a brass breastplate, and apparently these are allowed people from Holy Scripture eons ago to soothsaying, fortune telling, that kind of thing, be prophets of God, vessels of the God's message, that kind of thing. So he's read the Bible, seen his bits, and says, "Oh, I know, I'll create my own." So through the medium of the Archangel Moroni and his son, no, Archangel Mormon and his son Moroni, Moroni, take the I off, you know where I'm going with that, bequeathed to him golden plates, a set of scrying glasses or seeing glasses, which in turn were stones themselves, and the breastplate, and various other things. Urim and Thummim usually just means seeing stones or objects of divination, but through the Church of Mormon also means the place where God actually lives, or something along those lines. I've done a little bit of research. I tried to research this the other day. Nothing was going in. I went to sleep at 10:30 like an old man. It was terrible. But anyway, so through these golden plates, Joseph Smith decided that, or rather told anybody who would listen, that he alone, through the medium of these special glasses, the seer stone he already possessed, and a hat, he would be able to translate golden plates that were bequeathed to him and relay the Book of Mormon, which was the story of settlers in America 2,000 years ago. There were people in America 2,000 years ago, but I'm pretty sure they weren't white pasty men who tried to con everybody and shake anything with the boobs and a pulse. So he must have been a very charismatic man, because he convinced all these people, led them to believe that everything he said was true, convinced them that the golden plates were real, even though he was the only one who was allowed to look at them. There were witnesses, but if you look at the witnesses, the list of witnesses, because they're all related. Well, the vast majority of them are all related, going along with the mass delusion and basically lying under oath, so to speak, on an official document saying, "I have seen the golden plates and I know that they are real," doesn't necessarily make them real when you're deluded, as these people obviously turned out to be. Deluded, probably a hard word, but what other word are you going to use to describe them? All this criticism of the Book of Mormon aside, after watching the play 3 times, after watching the episode of South Park a few times, which the moral of the story in South Park is, we're nice people, just let us get on with it. That is true. However, if you look at the deeper workings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there's a little bit nefarious in places. Very, very wealthy church, lots of money going around. But if you're one of the 19-year-old boys who know nothing about the planet but feel compelled to go out and spend your own money venturing the planet and telling other people all the garbage you've been force-fed and brainwashed with, and you've got to pay for it yourself, when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is worth this much, then there's something a bit dodgy going on. But anyway, and apart from the fact the clothes they make the girls wear, that's almost, well, it's cultish. Cultish, I said. Because my interest was massively piqued by all the media and all the attention, I ventured into the Book of Mormon and actually started reading it. And one thing stuck out to me very, very quickly. And that thing is, an amazingly large amount of the paragraphs start with, "and so it came to pass." And then it came to pass. Lo, it came to pass. Came to pass, came to pass. And it led me to a conversation with my new best friend, ChatGPT, or a version of ChatGPT, Gemini, whichever one. Now, I'm not a fan of AI as in image generation, as in a substitute for intelligence, knowledge, and imagination. I'm fine with it as a consolidation of a multifaceted question into the simple answer. So if you've got a long enough train of thought, as I usually do, you can get the good answers you're after. So I asked the question, how many times in the Book of Mormon does a paragraph start with the phrase, "and so it came to pass," or variations thereof? The answer in this book, which isn't that thick, It's over 1,300 times. It's remarkable. Now, that stuck out to me. And the reason that stuck out to me was because you'll notice in my videos I say and I try to edit out as much, and I apologise if it does get irritating and grating when I'm editing. If you hear a noise in the background, we've got people in the kitchen. It is irritating to me, and I do apologise, but it's just, I pause just so I can collect my thoughts. And doing this when you're reciting the Book of Mormon, it's pretty much the same thing. There is no doubt in my mind, in the mind of other people, rational people, who are not swayed by, oh, God said it, then it must be true, that every time he said, and so it came to pass, he was just giving himself time to make shit up again. Language. But I didn't want this just to be my thoughts. So, you're going to have to ignore the glare, because I'm just about to bring a text document up, and it's not, I've got to get this sorted out. I've got to get some new glasses, anti-glare glasses, because this is ridiculous. Yeah, I'm doing things with poles and stuff with my halo light. Here we go, big old white document on my screen. Right, so, all my notes. Joseph Smith, criminal record, scrying glasses used for fraud. He was not a nice man, also a polygamist who waited until he was only 30 to really start to settle down. His youngest wife was 14 when he was 35, and so on. Anyway, so, converse with ChatGPT. So, I asked the question. Now, there is a logical fallacy that a lot of people use. It's called muddying the waters. It's starting a conversation or starting a debate with something which pollutes the well. However, I'd like to think I didn't do that on this occasion for the very simple reason I didn't start with saying what I was talking about. I asked a question that's quite generic. It could be misinterpreted, but I think if you bear with me, if you think that is what I was doing, then fair enough. But I assure you that was not my intention. So my first question was, is repeating the same thing at the start of every sentence a sign that someone is lying or fabricating a story? Again, with me, it's me just trying to get my things. I very rarely have a script, if ever. The only scripts I have are the ones which I did about my movies, where I was literally put myself in a little soundproof booth and read off. And you can tell my intonation, my dictation is different. With this, I'm literally making up as I go. So, repeating the same thing at the start of every sentence could be a sign of someone lying or fabricating a story, but it's definitely not a definitive indicator on its own. So I'm playing both sides of the story here. Think of it as like a single piece of a much larger puzzle. Here's why it might happen when someone isn't being truthful. Buying time to think. When someone is making things up as they go along, they might repeat a phrase to give themselves a moment to construct the next part of the lie. Trying to sound convincing. The repetition could be an attempt to emphasise a certain point or make the story sound more consistent and believable. Cognitive load. Lying can be mentally taxing. Repeating a familiar phrase might be a way to reduce some of that cognitive load, allowing them to focus on other aspects of the fabrication. Lack of spontaneity. When someone is recalling a genuine memory, their memory tends to flow more naturally with varied sentence structures, such as myself. A fabricated story might sound more rigid and less spontaneous. Remember, 1,300 times. However, it's crucial to consider other possibilities. Nervousness. Anxiety can manifest in repetitive speech patterns. Someone might be telling the truth but still feel nervous, leading to this kind of repetition. Communication style. Some people naturally have speech patterns that include repetition, and it's simply part of how they talk. Cognitive factors. Certain cognitive conditions might lead to repetitive speech. I'll come back to this. I'm going to answer all these. Emphasis. Sometimes people repeat phrases for emphasis even when telling the truth. Language processing. If someone is struggling to find the right words, they might repeat a phrase while they search. Now, the problem with all that is, now I'm going to do that. I'm going to read the positives and the negatives, the ones for my argument and the ones against my argument. But a few things you have to remember about this concept is, let me get that off screen so I'm not so, there you go. Joseph Smith was a con man. He was a liar and a fraud. He was a bigamist, a polygamist, a statutory rapist, anything under the sun. He was a very, very unpleasant man, and that became his downfall in the end. He was trying to force his religion on other people. A lot of people didn't like it, and he ended up getting shot. Bless him. But the way he translated, or supposedly translated, the plates into text was he put the plates in a hat, he donned the special glasses, shoved his head in the hat, and dictated. And he had several people dictating for him. So they would write it down. So the thread of consciousness, all that thing, don't apply because he's supposedly literally just reading from one book to the other. Now, I can speak a bit of French. Malheureusement, je ne veux pas le pantalon, which is my favourite expression at the moment. A lot of people don't know what that means, but if you don't speak French, you know exactly what I was talking about. Le singe conduit, il fait conduire dans l'autobus, which is an Eddie Izzard gag. Un singe sur la branche. I think it was Circle, watch that one. Anyway, so, if I was to... So I said to my boy, I had this big debate about this the other day with my boys, Luke and Max. Basically, if I had my original French textbook from school, Le Tricolore, remember that, guys? And I was translating from that to English to... Okay, Dave McKeegan's on. So I've got the original source material, I've got Le Tricolore, I am just reading it and I'm translating it to French as to the best of my ability. Someone else is writing it down. So I can literally go, the cat is on the branch, the monk is driving the bus, he's smoking a pipe, I have no trousers. Je n'avais pas le pantalon. So I'm raising up, there's no reason for me to pause, to hesitate, to start every sentence with a different phrase. And so it came to pass, the banana is under the chair. And so it came to pass, so on and so forth. You get my meaning. If you are reading from text, you don't have to start the same, unless every phrase or every book, every paragraph, so to speak, also, unless every paragraph started with the same words, which is very unlikely. And let us not forget the underlying thread that should be at the top of the screen: Joseph Smith was a liar. Bear that in mind when we carry on. To conclusion, for that little section, while repetitive sentence beginnings can sometimes be associated with deception, it's often not a reliable indicator on its own. You need to look for a cluster of other verbal and non-verbal cues to get a better sense of whether someone is being truthful. The other cues might include things like avoiding eye contact, fidgeting, inconsistent details, or changes in tone of voice. Remember, this guy's got his head in a hat and he's supposed to be reading directly from golden plates. It's all about considering the context and looking at the bigger picture, which we are, rather than focusing on a single linguistic quirk. So the conclusion of that one is, in fact, look at the bigger picture, and you'll get a better impression of what's actually going on. So, loading up that question, if you do have a chat with GPT and you have multifaceted points, continue on the same page. Don't go away, because sometimes they dump the cookies and they won't remember the conversation. So, to continue, when Joseph Smith was reading from the golden plates when the Book of Mormon was being written, he used the phrase "and so it came to pass" over 1,300 times. Given the answer to the previous question, could this be taken as evidence that Joseph Smith was making it up as he went along? And I always think it's very self-gratifying. I know it's not real, but when an AI compliments you for having a rather genius leap of faith and train of thought, it's really quite self-affirming. That's a really interesting point to bring up. Thanks. Especially in light of our previous conversation about repetitive phrasing and potential deception. Given that "and it came to pass" appears so frequently in the Book of Mormon, it certainly invites the question of whether this could be interpreted as evidence of Joseph Smith fabricating the narrative in real time. Let's consider this through the lens of the points we discussed earlier. Buying time to think. The repetitive use of "and it came to pass" could have provided Joseph Smith with brief pauses to formulate the next part of the narrative he was dictating. Translating ancient text, especially at the speed it was reportedly done, could be a cognitively demanding task, just like saying that word. Inserting this familiar phrase might have offered a mental breathing space. Attempting to sound archaic or biblical, the phrase "and it came to pass" has a somewhat archaic and biblical feel. Its frequent use might have been an attempt to lend the text an air of antiquity and authenticity, aligning with the claim of it being an ancient record. There's no doubt at all that Joseph Smith was an educated man. Con men, really successful confidence tricksters and fraudsters, do tend to be quite intelligent. Just wish they'd use their energies in better ways. So, I mean, he knew about, obviously, the Old and New Testament, King James Bible, which is the harshest version by all accounts. I think my next door neighbours are singing karaoke. It's only 9:15. Anyway, cognitive load. As we discussed, lying or creating a complex narrative on the spot can be mentally taxing. Using a repetitive, almost formulaic phrase could have reduced some of this burden, allowing Joseph Smith to focus on the storyline and content. Lack of natural flow. While some might argue it's a characteristic of the supposed ancient language, the sheer frequency of the phrase does interrupt the natural flow and variation one might expect in a genuinely translated text or spontaneously recounted narrative. How many times does a paragraph start with that phrase in the actual Bibles? No idea. However, just with any single linguistic feature, we need to be cautious about drawing definitive conclusions. There could be other interpretations, bear in mind. Claimed characteristic of the original language. Some might argue this phrase was indeed a common feature of the language inscribed in the golden plates. This is a matter of faith and belief of full members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Faith is believing without evidence. Influence of the King James Bible. The King James version of the Bible, which was widely read at the time, also uses the phrases "and it came to pass frequently." It's possible this familiar phrasing influenced the language Joseph Smith used, consciously or unconsciously. I would say consciously. Stylistic choice is conceivable, though perhaps less likely given the sheer volume, that Joseph Smith adopted this deliberate stylistic element for the narrative. Again, stylistic choice, he knew the expression was used several times in the King James Bible, so he used it as a mental breathing space. In conclusion, the extremely high frequency of "and it came to pass" in the Book of Mormon is certainly a notable linguistic feature that, when viewed through the lens of potential indicators of fabrication, raises questions. It aligns with some of the reasons why someone might use repetitive phrasing when constructing a narrative in real time. However, without definitive evidence about the nature of the golden plates and the translation processes, and considering alternative explanation rooted in faith and linguistic influence, it's difficult to definitively state this repetition proves fabrication. That is true, but again, we have to remember that Joseph Smith was a horrible, horrible person. So, and from that, it was actually a two-part question leading up to a final part. And now this is where I go off, I meander and I think to myself quite a lot. And one of the things not a lot of people know, or may not realise about the Book of Mormon, is there is 116 missing pages. Now what happened was, one of the scribes who was writing down everything that Joseph Smith was reading from the golden plates in the hat that he found on the top of a hill by a tree in his backyard. If you know, you know. So one of the scribes took some of the pages home and he showed them to his wife. And his wife, this is featured in the All About the Mormons, the South Park episode. So the scribe's wife didn't believe a word of it.
Martin, how do you know he isn't just making stuff up and pretending he's translating off golden plates?
Lucy Harris, smart, 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 smart.
Why would he make it up?
Martin Harris, dum, da, dum.
So she hid the pages in a bureau. So for whatever reason, the pages were lost, either destroyed or just misplaced, never going to find them. When the scribe went back to Joseph Smith, he was angry. He was crestfallen. Oh, I have betrayed my God. I can't find the pages. What am I going to do? God is so angry with me. I can't possibly translate these pages again. You still have the golden plates. They're in the hat. They're in the hat. Just read the plates again. You've got the glasses still. You've got the little seer stone. You've got the golden plates and you've got the hat. Just translate. No, not going to translate them again. Why? Well, his excuse was God was angry. Lovely, benevolent God was angry and wouldn't allow him to translate them again. Or everything he'd said the previous day, 116 pages of absolute garbage, was just stream of consciousness stuff, and he couldn't remember what he'd said. Let's put this to ChatGPT. Continuing with this thread and the potential conclusions gathered so far, could Joseph Smith's refusal to retranslate the missing stolen pages from the Book of Mormon be seen as further evidence he was making it up as he went and simply couldn't remember what he said before? That's a very insightful and logical next step in this line of inquiry. I've impressed an AI chatbot. Considering the potential implications and the repetitive phrasing, Joseph Smith's reluctance to retranslate the lost 116 pages could indeed be interpreted as further evidence supporting the hypothesis that the Book of Mormon was a product of real-time fabrication. Here's why this refusal strengthens that argument. Memory limitations of a fabricated narrative. If the text was being actively created by Joseph Smith during the translation process, recalling the exact wording and details of 116 pages worth of complex narrative would be immense, if not impossible. Unlike retrieving a fixed pre-existing text, the tricolor, Recreating something spontaneously generated relies heavily on short-term memory and the specific context of its creation. The loss of these pages would essentially mean trying to remember a detailed improvisation. Inconsistency concerns. Attempting a retranslation would carry a significant risk of inconsistencies with the original dictation. These discrepancies could easily be noticed by those who had already heard or potentially seen the original manuscript. Further undermining the credibility of the translation process, refusal would be a way to avoid this potential pitfall. Maintaining the aura of a unique, untranslatable artifact. The narrative surrounding the golden plates emphasise their unique and sacred nature. Retranslating a lost portion might demystify this process to some extent, suggesting a level of human recall and reconstruction rather than a direct divine translation. The explanation given, that evil men might alter the translation to contradict the original, desperate, serves to maintain the unique status of the plates in the translation. Yes, one of the claims, another reason why he said he wouldn't do it was because if he retranslated it, the texts that were lost could have been refound, edited. This is what he originally said, this is what he's saying is now. So for fear of contradiction, that's why he refused to retranslate. Unlikely. Plausible deniability. The first time I heard that was Independence Day. By attributing the inability to retranslate the external factors, the potential tampering by those who stole the manuscript, Joseph Smith could avoid directly admitting any limitations in his ability to produce a text. He was a fraudster, conman, bigamist, polygamist, but he was the one who was chosen by God to translate these plates. I can think of several other people better suited. However, it's important to acknowledge the counter-arguments and the perspective held by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Again, pinch of salt. Joseph Smith was a con man. These people are desperate to hold on to their beliefs for very much the same reason conspiracy theorists are flat earthers. They've been proven wrong. The evidence that they are wrong and have been wrong for quite some time is laid bare for everyone to see, but they're just too embarrassed to admit they made a mistake. Divine mandate and the risk of alteration. The explanation given within the narrative is that God instructed Joseph Smith not to retrans that portion because the wicked men who stole the original manuscript intended to alter it and then point to discrepancies with the new translation to discredit the work. From a faith-based perspective, this divine instruction supersedes any human limitations. So basically what he's saying is he couldn't retranslate it accurately again. He had the source material. He had the golden plates. Why would they be different at all? If the pre-translated text still existed and were unearthed, they should be identical. But his claim that wicked men would use any discrepancies, are we talking punctuation? Are we talking adverbs? Oh look, he said and therefore in this. No, doesn't make sense. Focus on the remaining text. Believers often emphasise the vast amount of material that was translated and the spiritual witness they received for the complete Book of Mormon as it exists today. The loss of the 116 pages is seen as a trial and as a demonstration of God's wisdom in protecting the integrity of the larger work. Desperate coping mechanisms. We don't need the pages because the rest of the book is good enough. Yeah. It's like the cousin you don't talk about. Despite these faith-based explanations, from a purely analytical standpoint, the refusal to retranslate the lost pages does present a significant challenge to the idea of a straightforward translation of a pre-existing text. It strongly aligns with the difficulties one would face in trying to recreate a substantial amount of spontaneously generated content. Therefore, building upon the observation of repetitive phrasing, Joseph Smith's inability or unwillingness to retranslate the lost 116 pages can be considered a compelling piece of circumstantial evidence supporting the hypothesis that the Book of Mormon was, at least in part, a product of his own creative process during the translation. AI put that in. It suggests a reliance on immediate recall rather than a reference to a fixed source materials. It was obviously manufactured on the spot. There's no amount of faith-based mental gymnastics that can cover the fact that, one, he got caught basically by the people he supposedly, or people who knew people he trusted. For every 20 people who will take in your crap, there will be one or two who will look from the sideline and say, I'm not believing a word of this, and if I can prove you're full of shit, I will do my darndest to prove that. And that is what happened. The scribe's wife hid the pre-translated pages, under the suspicion that he wouldn't be able to retranslate the pages, and that is exactly what happened. Put my own little note here. Let's not mince words. Can it be stressed enough how gullible followers of the Book of Mormon must be to follow a fanfic that was so obviously manufactured by a con man? But really, what does annoy me more than anything else, and it's not just the Book of Mormon, it is any religious followers of any religious sect, so to speak, who will blindly follow teaching scriptures, the text they are given, and a lot of it is certain religious freak of mind. It's ingrained into them the second they learn to read. ABC, God is great. You know, run, spot, run, Jesus died on the cross. Here's Easter, here's Joseph, it's an amazing dream coat. It's very hard to break through that amount of social conditioning, let's face it, brainwashing and indoctrination that happens from a very early age. But with the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, it's still relatively young religion. I think it's coming up on its 200th birthday. I think it was around 1830, 1835 was when it happened. And that is coming up in the next decade or so. 200 years of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's blossomed into this massive multinational money-making machine, which is, let's face it, that's all organised religion really is. To believe you're being faithful to be a good person. I'm being a good person because God loves me, and if I don't believe God, and if I don't spread his word, I'm going to be thrust into the fiery pits of sulphur. I'm going to be punished by the devil, spooky Mormon hell dream. I'm going to be punished by the devil, so I must be good, otherwise don't be good because you've been threatened. Directly or indirectly. The threat of eternal torment, if you're not a good person, doesn't make you a good person. I think Christopher Hitchens might have said this, who was a genius, by the way. I'm not going to blow my own trumpet here, but I like to think I'm a good person. The reason I know I'm good is because I've raised 2 kids with Annie, my former wife. We have fought and struggled and endeavoured with both of them. I've probably gone this before. They both have ADHD. They both have autism. Luke was kind of okay. Max, I don't know if I've gone through this before. We are talking on the carpet at 4 o'clock in the morning with working 3 hours, going through a mountain of paperwork to try to get them what we call over here an EHCP, which is an educational healthcare plan. Documentation, doctor's notes, everything like that. We are doing this out of the love for our son. 2 high court cases to get into the school we needed him to get into. And when I say high court cases, I mean high court in London. A week after we were at the High Court in London, apart from the fact COVID broke out, Johnny Depp was there the week after. That's the Archway building. We were there. Not at the same time, because the second High Court case was still technically in that building, but it was virtual. Judge was on our side. Anyway, my point is, sorry, complete ramble there. A couple of that, I'm a first aider. Out of the goodness of my heart, I get paid £6 a month, so it's a tiny reward, but let's face it, my mantra is if you can lose it down the back of the sofa, it's not worth worrying about. But I'm a first aider. I've been first on site at 2 road traffic accidents where I gave aid to the injured until the paramedics arrived. I have been part of a charitable organisation that's raised £75,000 over about 10 years for loads of different charities. That was part of a soapbox derby. I was chief safety officer, giving up my August bank holidays, my own free time to do that, and I personally started a rather ill-fated petition campaign to get a local landmark turned into a theatre. It was unsuccessful for very political reasons, but I didn't have anyone looking over my shoulder. I didn't do it, any of these things, because I thought if I didn't, I'm going to get punished later in life. When I die, I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to go there and get my own planet, which apparently is something else they believe. I didn't need any forceful, vengeful, or loving God guiding my hand when I did any of these things. I just like to think I'm a nice person. I do things for other people. I'm altruistic, very often to a fault. If you're going to be nice, be nice. Don't do it because you're being threatened, which is basically what anybody who is religious is. So, in conclusion, the evidence that the Book of Mormon was made up on the spot was the very fact that it was patently obvious that Joseph Smith was making up on the spot. And the hidden story, the story that not a lot of people know about the Book of Mormon, to a certain degree, is pretty much proof of that. When you're making stuff up day by day and you lose a whole day of manufactured nonsense, try doing it yourself. Go through a whole day of conversations of your life, interacting with other people, talking on the telephone, this, that and the other. Then the following day, try to remember every single thing you said at every single point, including punctuation, pauses, and it came to pass. If you can do that, you're a very special person indeed. But I can guarantee 99.999... recurring wouldn't even stand a chance. So thank you very much for watching. Well, I enjoyed that one. I did actually re-record this a couple of days ago, but the sound, lighting and everything was atrocious, so I thought, sod it, I'll just do it again. Yes, so draw your own conclusions. If you want to be a good person, be a good person. It's really that simple. Nice people are nice. Because society grows great when old men plant trees, the shade of which they know they'll never sit under. I stole that directly from Ricky Gervais's Afterlife. And I do that unashamedly. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.